Awesome. Okay, Orlando, whenever you're ready, you can get started.
Cool, yeah, so I'll just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so just to kind of give a brief introduction, I'm not sure kind of what you guys, or what they told you, but so my name is Orlando Grossman. I'm the co-founder and CEO of StackerDAO Labs. So just to kind of, I divide this presentation into three parts. First is a kind of an introduction, both kind of just about me, StackerDAO Labs, and then also about DAOs generally. And the second part, I kind of get into a little more of the gritty details about kind of like the technical implementation of DAOs. And then the third part, I talk about DAOs on stacks and also kind of provide more details about how you could kind of like what we do and how you could form and manage your DAO with us. So again, just to give a quick background. So our mission at StackerDAO Labs is to revolutionize collective ownership. And we're doing this by transforming the ways that individuals and communities can manage resources and take action. And so we're creating a one-stop shop to create and manage legally compliant Web3 organizations powered by Bitcoin. So we currently have, so we're building a no-code DAO generation and management platform. We currently have an MVP out right now with that. So currently a DAO set up there, and we have several DAOs actually going to launch in October. And then also we have several templates that you can kind of generate from our platform, which we're kind of, some of these templates we're testing right now on testnet, or we're doing private tests with them on mainnet with certain users, and then kind of like an alpha leak, but we're kind of aiming for potentially maybe like sometime maybe mid-November to open the platform up to the public. And so also I'm a lawyer by background, and I'll get to my background in a second, but we're also going to be developing legal tech tools for DAOs, since there's like a ton of regulatory and compliance issues with DAOs. And eventually we also are going to develop an SDK so that developers can basically build their own customized DAOs, since DAOs vary widely. We'll get to this in a bit, but DAOs vary widely. And really their optimal structure kind of depends on the use case. And so with our developer tools, the idea is that devs can then be able to kind of come up with their own structures, and they're also their own interfaces for those DAOs. And so, like I mentioned, I'm a lawyer by background. I worked at a firm called Gunderson Detmer right before this, Gunderson. And so I was a startup and venture capital attorney at Gunderson. Gunderson's known for being the law firm that's representing the most amount of venture capital dollars raised, since that metric's been measured. I was also a securities and government enforcement litigator. So basically representing kind of like large corporations when bad things happened and their shareholders sued, or when the government came knocking. So I'm pretty familiar also with like securities issues with with crypto and tokens and securities issues generally. So my co-founder, Ryan Waits, he was a former head of engineering at Rabbit Hole. So he's our CTO. And lead dev. And if you don't know Rabbit Hole is probably known for being the most prominent learn to earn platform that currently functions mostly on Ethereum and Polygon. And so just to kind of set the scene, and I think to kind of like grasp your head around DAOs, I think it's kind of good to have kind of a quick history lesson. So the modern corporation can basically trace its roots back to the Industrial Revolution, and specifically kind of two legal innovations. Many like historians kind of argue helped to spark the Industrial Revolution. The first being the concept of limited liability. So before that, if you try to do a venture together and something bad happened, any individual could basically get sued, and like their whole like life savings could be used for damages. And so a limited liability allows for basically like an entity to be formed, and basically any sort of damages, or if you got sued, or any sort of liabilities that entity would have, would be basically cut off from any investors or employees of the entity. And so that combined with the ability to quickly form a corporate charter. So before, you basically needed to get like permission from like a state legislator or Congress, or part of a parliament overseas, or even like, you know, when you had monarchies, literally permission from the king to be able to form a corporation, which is kind of ridiculous. And so now, as you know, you can basically form like a corporate entity if you click a button, and maybe it takes like a few days for the like government agency to kind of approve everything. And so like that ability to kind of quickly form these entities and to kind of cut off liability to individuals kind of really helped to kind of usher in different ventures and people to take on more risk, leading to the Industrial Revolution. Fast forward to today's day and age, we're now entering, or kind of have already entered, a new digital revolution, where now you don't necessarily, you know, before trust used to be a major component in businesses, right? It was like very recommended that you like trusted your business partners highly, et cetera. But now people are meeting each other online without even, again, like meeting each other in person, and doing things literally at the speed of light through the internet. And that's kind of where we are now today with DAOs, as you have blockchain technology emerging that basically helps kind of even further remove this trust component. DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations, are starting to emerge as kind of like this like brand new paradigm shift in coordination, probably the largest part of paradigm shift that we've seen since the Industrial Revolution, and how kind of humans, projects, ventures end up coordinating themselves. And so DAOs currently have a wide range of use cases. And this figure needs to be edited because it's probably a few weeks ago, and I think it's probably lower now. I think it's like probably 10 billion, but at the time we're managing over like $10.5 billion of assets. And you have DAOs that are managing DeFi protocols, grant giving DAOs, service DAOs that are replacing freelancer agencies, investment DAOs, replacing traditional investment vehicles, social DAOs, and many others. And so, you know, this begs the question though, what is a DAO? And, you know, we are early. I would say, frankly, there's like no strict definition of a DAO or of the word DAO. You know, if you ask like 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different definitions. But I like to kind of use two different definitions when explaining this. The first is kind of like what I call a beginner definition. This is what you see a lot in, like, if you ever read an article on like Fortune or something, or Business Insider about DAOs, this is how they describe it. And I think it's pretty catchy and kind of gets to the point. I think especially for people who just don't know, have no experience with DAOs or Web3. And that's a group chat with a shared bank account. Again, I think it really kind of hits the point home for a lot of people. But I actually, as someone who's working with DAOs, hate this definition, because it's like, okay, well, you could just be a group chat with a shared bank account, right? Like, you don't need to form a DAO. And I think it's actually kind of maybe leads to a little more confusion, because once you kind of get into it and you're like, okay, I want to form a DAO, definition is no longer helpful. And so my preferred definition, and again, this is my own preference, I'll let you know different preferences, is an association managed by its members with a shared mission whose rules are enforced by blockchain software. And I think the reason why I like this is I think this really nails down kind of all the components of a DAO. And literally, like, I have there, you know, the O, the D, the A, because DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations. And I think the key, you know, the really key components here are that it's managed by its members, and that it uses blockchain software, aka smart contracts, to enforce its kind of governance structure and rules, and to take action. And so why would you want to form a DAO? So these are kind of like you know, I've been looking at this a lot, kind of seen when DAOs fail, why they fail, and kind of like what are the good reasons to form and what are not. And I think I could kind of come up with 5 non-exhaustive reasons to form a DAO. I think the best way to think about it is DAOs are just organizations that inherit the general properties of crypto and Web3. So kind of just for whatever reason, so you could almost like think about it as like whatever reason you would want to generally be in Web3 or crypto, or why you think, you know, crypto, like what it does for money, or Web3, what it does for the internet or finance. Kind of those same exact reasons could just be applied to organizations. And they're basically censorship resistance. And so if you have an organization, or if you want to manage some kind of product or protocol that you think should be resistant to censorship, or like shouldn't really have a central point of failure, then you're going to want the entity or the organization managing that product or protocol to also be censorship resistant. And so if you want to manage a censorship resistant product or protocol, then you may want to form a DAO, because DAOs are also censorship resistant. The other thing is that it removes trust. And so you're able to raise and deploy capital in a quick, digitally native and trustless way. And so, again, a lot of things are happening internet now. However, let's say if I meet some people online, a bunch of add-on, a bunch of like monkey JPEGs, but I don't exactly know them, right? I might be kind of hesitant. Let's say we all kind of want to pull some money together to invest, or maybe there's some kind of cause, like maybe like Ukraine or something. We want to like give grants or like provide funding to people or organizations that are helping with the situation in Ukraine. I might be kind of hesitant to just like send money to someone halfway across the world, if they're even halfway across the world. I mean, I don't even know where they're at. Because frankly, like whoever I'm sending money to, at least in the traditional system, you kind of need one person to kind of run that and run the bank account for that. And so, that person can just basically like run off the money, right? There's like literally nothing stopping that person from running off for the money. And like they might be in a jurisdiction where it might be very difficult to kind of go to the courts or you see some kind of legal remedy to kind of like enforce their rights or like go after them and get your money back. And so because they run on smart contracts, smart contracts kind of remove that trust component. And so because you can just like read the code, that the rules are predefined. And so, maybe the rules are like you need a certain percentage of people to vote on something before they can move the money anywhere. If I like deposit certain funds into a DAO. And so that allows you to kind of remove that trust component and allows people to kind of raise and deploy capital in this very like trustless way that I think is very important in a digital native world. The third thing is community ownership. Again, like kind of if you're like a user or you're affiliated with some kind of project, in the traditional system, you have no real ownership over that. And if you have a DAO, especially what I would call like a real DAO, because like we'll get into this later, there are some DAOs that I kind of would call fake DAOs. But if you have a real DAO that is run completely on like automated smart contracts, literally your tokens or your governance token or whatever is being used for governance, literally gives you power. It gives you rights, right? It like makes you be like one of a certain amount that can actually make things happen, or not make things happen if you vote against certain proposals. And so you actually have ownership over it. And this can be important if you're a DAO founder, because there are a lot of studies on basically like if your project is very community based, when communities feel like they have a sense of ownership, it actually kind of makes them a lot more engaged. So it's also almost like a growth hack as well. So that's something to think about if you're like thinking of launching a project. That's kind of one of the benefits of forming a DAO. The other thing is it allows you to kind of have a very wide range of diverse views and network effects. So this is pretty helpful for like something like Nouns DAO, which is like a CCO, which means that CC0 NFT project. Which means that basically their copyright is kind of given to the world, so anyone can do anything with it. And so if you have a project where you kind of want like random people in your network to kind of just do things and contribute, and have different views and just kind of like benefit from, not having this centralized group of actors, but really you're kind of, and there are some projects where it makes sense to be more centralized, because and we can get into that, but you may have a certain project like something like Nouns DAO, where like it's literally just a meme. And so like the more people who are kind of thinking of new creative ways to integrate this meme and stuff, the kind of better off you are. Also Gitcoin does public goods funding, like who defines the public good, right? Like it's very difficult. And it's kind of like typically with public good stuff, it's kind of best if you have like a wide range of views that are kind of receiving different grants. And so that's another reason to kind of take advantage of those network effects that you can get, and diverse views that you can get with DAOs. And finally, regulatory arbitrage. So I am a lawyer, I have to do this disclaimer. Nothing I say here is legal advice. I'm not your lawyer. If you have any questions in your own circumstance, I suggest you get your own attorney. But basically, if a DAO issues its own token, there is a better argument that the token is not a security if it's being managed, the product is being managed by a DAO, because one element in finding that it is a security is that token holders have a reasonable expectation of profit from the management efforts of others. Especially management efforts of others is the important part there. So if the whole product is being run by the token holders who can decide themselves what happens, you're not relying on others, you're relying on yourself. right? And the second argument is that it's also not managerial. It's not management efforts. It's kind of decentralized, diffuse group of people just like kind of making things happen. And so those are kind of, I would say, like, in my eyes, kind of the 5 reasons why you should form a DAO. Why should you not form a DAO? So the biggest problem that I think people run into with DAOs is that, frankly, they just do it for marketing purposes. A lot of people think, they hear DAOs, major buzzword in Web3, and they're just like, yeah, we should form a DAO. Let's like add it to our roadmap. If that's your primary reason for forming a DAO, you're going to run into trouble. And I'm telling you that right now. And like, I'm kind of incentivized to have more DAOs be launched, right? And I'm still saying, like, and I've spoken to founders about this, like, if that's the only reason why, just because you feel like you should, or it's a thing in Web3, I would think long and hard about forming a DAO. Because the problem is that when you go this way, what happens is that usually then the founders don't want to give up control because they're just doing it for marketing, or it just doesn't make sense, right? Like, there are projects that necessarily, like, or businesses, et cetera, that like you just kind of need to be more centralized. I think SaaS software is a good example of this, where it's like, it's very hard for it to be kind of like decentralized. You kind of need like priorities to be set, and like people to kind of like follow those priorities, and people to be on top of each other. And that's literally management, that's centralization. And, I think sometimes people in Web3, like, they want decentralization for everything. And it's like, no, I think like centralization sometimes is good and makes sense in certain use cases. It just depends on your use case. But again, if you're providing critical infrastructure, right, for finance, maybe you shouldn't be centralized, right? So like, you just gotta really think about your use case. But those are kind of, what ends up happening is like, it's either a project where it should be centralized, right? Because it makes sense to be centralized. It doesn't make sense for it to be decentralized, or the founders just don't want to give up control. And then what ends up happening is either the project is super inefficient and it can't really do anything or achieve its goals because, again, it's really something that should be centralized, or B, the community feels defrauded or deceived because they think they have power, but basically the founders never actually fully decentralized, and they just market themselves as a DAO. And then like things happen where the founders defy the community, and it leads to kind of these big scandals. You can see like this product called Bancor or Solend, where this has happened, and it just kind of leads to a lot of problems, and like probably is not good for the long-term health of your project. And so, you can set up a DAO, a corporation, a few clicks on like certain websites, but how do you form a DAO? So I would say there's kind of 3 components to DAOs. The first is, and it's kind of your base, and it's I think the first thing you should work on when forming a DAO is the social and community layer. You kind of need to build some kind of following or community first. It doesn't have to be like the size of your ultimate end goal community, right? But like at least have some kind of core, strong group of people who are kind of ride or die a bit with whatever you're doing, really believe in your mission. Because if you don't have this strong kind of core community, when you do launch a DAO, like you get distracted, a lot of things going on, like it's just nothing's going to happen and no one's going to care. The second thing is a technical implementation, which is the smart contracts that run your DAO, and then also the interface for your DAO. And then finally, you have like legal and compliance, because as much as like, if you want to be cyberpunks and just like, do whatever and like not be under any government jurisdiction, the reality is that laws apply to you, whether you like to or not, depending on your activity. And it doesn't matter if you're registered as a corporation or a legal entity or not. The law still has ways to deal with non-registered entities or groups that haven't formed legal entities, but are basically acting as companies or nonprofits. And actually, the reason why you don't see companies or nonprofits go like act this way, and why you see them register, is because there are a lot of problems with being an unincorporated association, and it can lead to a lot of issues down the line. And so just to something to keep in mind, laws still apply to you, even if you don't want them to, and even if you don't register as something, depending on what your actions are. I won't get too much into this, but also just a really quickly note. So StackerDAO Labs, we're focused on 2 and 3 here. So the technical implementation and legal compliance, we very much view the social and community layer as outside of our lane. And there are other tools that I definitely recommend for that. But that's just like not our focus. It'd be way too much and we'd be stretched out way too thin. I'm not going to get too much into this, but basically, literally, like honestly, legal compliance might be the biggest headache you'll face when you're starting a DAO. And the major issues are entity and member liability, securities if you issue your own token, and taxes. Because again, even if you don't submit yourself to a jurisdiction, you're still going to owe taxes depending on what your activity is. And what makes things worse is if you don't submit yourself to a jurisdiction, then any jurisdiction that you may have touched, including like who your users are, your customers, whatever, may have a claim on you owing taxes there. And which is like, you don't want like multiple jurisdictions saying you owe them taxes. So that's kind of like another issue as well. There's some questions you should think about if you ever start thinking about forming a DAO. Who would your members be and how will they be identified? This is pretty important. Like the members of a DAO don't necessarily have to be your entire community. It can be specific to kind of specific community members, maybe community members that have showed a certain amount of contribution to the DAO or hold a certain kind of status. And this kind of leads into how they'll be identified, whether it be with fungible tokens, NFTs, allow listed wallet addresses, or a combination. You also need to think about how the DAO will fund itself, because everything requires money and you kind of need some sort of treasury to do things usually. And so some options there are to issue its own token. If you're an NFT project, you can kind of have an NFT project and use the proceeds for the mint and potentially even from royalties as for your treasury. If you're building a product or protocol, you can use revenue from that. Or you can have membership itself be predicated on depositing and funding the DAO. And so the other thing I would say you also want to keep in mind too is whether the DAO will end up kind of owning any sort of smart contracts, because that may have an impact on how it's structured. And what I mean there is if it will own and manage its own protocol or its own token. And then also you should really think and have a plan as to like how you're going to keep your community engaged, because the community engagement is like also one of the major problems with DAOs. Again, there's like a million DAOs. It's hard to kind of keep people really engaged in everything and kind of keep their attention in this day and age. So because I'm going to like focus on technical limitations and I'll just have a quick note here in the social and community layer. Some tools to manage the DAO social layer. There's some chat and forum discussions. There's Discord, Telegram, Console. There are like what I call like non-autonomous voting / like survey apps. So these are basically apps that kind of allow you to take certain surveys based on tokens, but they don't have any actual functionality for the DAO. So they don't have to do anything, but they're a good way to kind of get temperature checks, maybe do some discussions to know if like, if you propose an idea, whether there's like support for the idea, and then you can kind of refine that idea more over time until you're kind of ready for a formal proposal that may actually have like actual functionality if it's approved, or automatic functionality if it's approved. And then there's also like community growth and engagement resources like Friends. And both Friends and Console are actually apps that are built by people in the Stacks ecosystem. And so part 2, technical implementation. This may get a little like very kind of nitty gritty. So please let me know if it's like kind of boring. I can kind of zoom out a bit. And I'm also kind of obviously like biased because I think about this kind of stuff every day. But again, just let me know if it gets a little too in the weeds. So I would say there's kind of 2 main DAO technical implementations. The first is what I would call just an actually like decentralized autonomous DAO. And it's funny that you have to say that, even though decentralized autonomous is still the name, because like there are a lot of like DAOs that are not decentralized or autonomous. And so with number 1, and I'll just hold like autonomous DAOs. And so for an autonomous DAO, the rules are encoded in smart contracts. And what this means is that the voting outcomes, which are based off of the smart contracts, automatically cause a DAO to execute smart contracts. So if you have a proposal to like send tokens somewhere, and that proposal is approved, then the DAO will actually execute that that proposal and will like send the contracts. And so the whole idea here is that you're removing trust, like no one has to do anything. It's as soon as those thresholds are met that are based on the rules that are on the smart contract, the DAO takes action. And so yeah, so and it obviously is for on-chain activity. Anything off-chain is going to require some trust by definition. But the whole idea is to have all on-chain activity to be 100% trustless. And the other implementation are kind of what I would call it the multi-sig plus surveys implementation. So this really took off kind of like in 2001 because most DAOs are on Ethereum, and Ethereum gas was like 100, like over $100 per transaction. So on-chain voting kind of just didn't make sense because like no one would ever vote if you have to pay $100 for each vote for each DAO that you're in. It's like outrageous, right? Like only rich people could vote. And so I think this makes sense. So a lot of DAOs ended up using a multi-sig and surveys. And by surveys, I mean like Snapshot or basically any sort of either on-chain or off-chain voting system that just doesn't lead to automatic functionality. And basically then the problem with this approach though is that you are now trusting the multi-sig signers. So usually between like 4 to 9, and usually not even 9, it's most of the time probably like 4 to 6 or 7 people to basically not rug you. And again, usually it's like a majority. So it's like really you're talking about maybe like 2 to 4 people that those 2 to 4 people just have to come together, and you can literally take all the funds, change the protocol in however way they want. So you still have this massive trust component in this approach, and you're still relying on those specific people, those like 2 to 4 people, to just like not wreak havoc and not do something that enriches them or just do whatever they want. There's also legal risk, I'll say more legal risk there if you are on the multi-sig, because now, like I mentioned before, it's not the DAO token holders that are taking the action, right? It's so you're not relying on others. You're relying, on yourself. You're relying on others, aka the multi-sig signers. And also, if you have like 2 to 4 people that are doing everything, that looks pretty managerial, right? Like it's literally very centralized in management. So it looks like management efforts of others, which is a prong in finding whether a token is a security. And so just like the pros and cons of autonomous DAOs, really the pros are kind of just the advantages I mentioned before that kind of just really inherit all of crypto's properties: automated, censorship resistant, decentralized, trust resist or trustless. The community actually has power, like their tokens actually do things. And there's a strong argument that the tokens are not securities. The disadvantages though is they also inherit all crypto's properties. Because the smart contracts can't be changed, they're more prone to technical or smart contract risk. The community has to vote on all on-chain actions, which this lead can be, if your DAO is taking a lot of action, that can just lead to a lot of operational inefficiencies. The voting period may take a while. You may have a lot of voter fatigue. People can front run the DAO because everything's public. There's also more, I would say, complicated legal entity formation issues. And like the founding team just may make sense that the founding team has more control in the beginning of the DAO's life. And you can have high gas fees, if you have high gas fees, that can be an issue. That's really more of an issue on Ethereum mainnet. Some solutions though for this is you can have sub DAOs that are kind of like smaller units that can act as like a department or a working group or a committee of a larger DAO. They can be multi-sigs, or they can be their own autonomous DAOs. And they can kind of like take on, maybe their own rules can be much quicker. So they can take on a lot of these operational tasks that need to be done quickly. Or if you want, and like the whole idea being the parent DAO will delegate these tasks, plus with usually some funding, to the sub DAO to kind of like take care of that. And that's like, I don't know, in my eyes, I think that arrangement is fine, because at the end of the day, power is still flowing from the token holders at the parent DAO, and they're just delegating some of this authority down. You can also have emergency powers. So some like kind of fully autonomous DAOs will still, at least in the beginning, kind of have training wheels, and so allow a small group of people to kind of have emergency powers in case things go kind of haywire. So there's like an exploit. The emergency powers can kind of like quickly act and kind of make changes in the DAO. By default, every StackerDAO, so like the DAOs that we launch, have emergency powers, though the founding team can request to have them. By default, they sunset after 6 months. That can be longer, can be shorter. Also, the full DAO at any time can vote to remove them, because at the end of the day, with our DAOs always, the full DAO always has complete control and can kind of just do anything. So they can always vote to remove the emergency powers. They can vote to extend the emergency powers. Really, we just provide a lot of flexibility there. And you can also just progressive decentralization. So a DAO can kind of start off as the founders in a multi-sig, and then progressively automate and decentralize more of the DAO's functions, eventually becoming a fully kind of decentralized and autonomous DAO. Just a case study. So Compound is kind of the autonomous DAO grandfather. I say this because the most common contract used for autonomous DAOs is called the compound governor contract. It's called the compound governor contract because it was created by Compound for their own DAO. And so I would say most autonomous DAOs use this, since most of them are on Ethereum, and so most of them just fork this this contract. And the way it works is you have a governance token, it being the DAO's token that's used for voting. There's delegation. There's like a certain threshold of like you or token holders need to hold a certain amount of thresholds to submit proposals. Voting lasts a certain amount of period, and there's like a time lock. So after a vote, like a proposal approved, there's still like a 2-day time period before the proposals execute in case a malicious proposal comes down. And if there are emergency powers enabled, the emergency power team can kind of do something about that. And so actually our stacks, we like StackerDAO Labs, we have 3 different products. The first is called StackerDAO, our namesake. And so actually StackerDAO is modeled after Compound governance. It has this exact same structure. There's currently a DAO on Stacks called MegaDAO that's live now that also basically has this very similar structure. So ENS DAO is a good example of a DAO that uses sub-DAOs for operations. So they use like an ecosystem sub-DAO that basically it's basically the community management. Sorry, not the community management. It basically does the I think like technical smart contracts development. They have a community sub DAO that basically helps to kind of manage the community. They have a public goods sub DAO, so their DAO also provides grants to public goods, and that sub DAO kind of facilitates that. And they have a meta governance sub DAO that helps to kind of deal with like internal governance issues, basically, and like help to kind of make any governance changes or it helps like improve governance, like create tools for governance, etc. And then you have the Nouns DAO. So Nouns DAO is a good example of a project. I kind of discussed Nouns DAO before, like CC0 NFT project that provides grants like anyone in the ecosystem, and anyone who holds the NFT can vote to provide grants to anyone who submits a proposal. And so part 3, so launching a DAO on Stacks. So just at least I guess before really like Stacks, there was no way to form DAOs funded by native Bitcoin or secured by the Bitcoin network due to technology constraints. Enter Stacks. So Bitcoin DAOs are now enabled by Bitcoin layers like Stacks, representing a massive opportunity. So why would you want to have a Bitcoin DAO? Number one, the whole point of this is decentralization. You may want to use, like the most decentralized and secure network to kind of build your DAO on top of, number one. And all Stack transactions ultimately settle on Bitcoin. Number two, Bitcoin also is the largest market cap in crypto by far. It's almost the size of, I think it's 80% of the size of like all the other blockchains combined. And so there's also potentially a massive amount of liquidity that people can use, right? Like if you're talking to new entrants to crypto, Bitcoin is by far the best brand name. It's the one that everyone knows. And so, some reasons why you would want to form a Bitcoin DAO. So how to launch a DAO on Stacks. So if you want an autonomous DAO, we're actually the only application currently that allows that. If you want a multi-sig, also just real quick, I know I was like bashing a bit the multi-sig approach. I also think the multi-sig approach makes sense if you have more of a social DAO that really isn't doing or taking much action, in the sense that like if you're not doing a lot of on-chain activity, managing assets, managing smart contracts, then it may not really matter if you have an autonomous DAO. Just you're actually probably adding complexity when you don't need it. And they're like a multi-sig for social DAOs. And by social DAO, I mean kind of literally just like a token gated Discord. It like probably makes a lot of sense to just use like a multi-sig, some kind of like survey taking app. And so if you want to form a multi-sig, so we also have a multi-sig product as well that we actually, it's kind of in private testing right now, but we have one on mainnet right now. And there's also multi-safe, which is another multi-sig platform. The kind of difference I would say between multi-safe and our multi-safe product, it's called Teams, is that with multi-safe, you can only transfer tokens. Though because of that, I would say any sort of exploit or attack surface is minimized. With us and our Teams multi-sig, you can manage smart contracts. You can make smart contract calls. You can be the owner of a smart contract. You can change different function, it can like change different parameters in a smart contract. So there's like more functionality. That being said, admittedly, that also necessarily means that there's probably like a higher or larger attack vector. So that's kind of like the trade-off there. And then for the social and community layer, there's Discord, Friends, and Console. And so just quickly, a quick overview of how our smart contracts work. We use this framework called the StackerDAO framework. It was developed by a Stacks developer called Marvin Jansen. And the framework is basically a series of smart contracts that communicate with each other. And they're extremely modular and composable. And basically the DAO itself is kind of like different building blocks. So you have a core, and that core executes any transaction. So that's the guy who's like executing anything. And it also, so it only executes proposals, and it keeps a list of extensions, which the DAO has enabled. And I'll get to extensions in a sec. The second feature is that proposals are smart contracts. So this allows a DAO to automatically, once the proposal is approved, to execute that smart contract because it has some underlying logic. Usually it points to an extension, and then the DAO can then make make that smart contract call, and then actually execute and take whatever action it is that was like in that proposal. Third is that extensions give form to the DAO. So the extensions are basically everything else in the DAO, both its governance structure and also anything that enables any specific type of functionality. So its treasury is an extension. You'll have an extension that defines who can submit proposals. There's an extension that defines who can vote on proposals. And so this allows it to be very modular. And now let's say if you're the DAO decides that it wants to actually change its governance structure and maybe allow, maybe you're an NFT project that has tokens. Maybe initially you only allowed token holders, or you allow token holders to be able to vote, but maybe now you decide you kind of want to make it closer and make sure that like NFT holders, or you only want to define membership as like also owning the NFT as well. You could then basically disable that voting extension and enable a new extension that both requires a vote, the NFT and the fundable token to vote. And so an extension is also, so if you want to, let's say, enable like your DAO to buy or sell NFTs or change certain parameters in a protocol, or to like swap tokens on Alex or DeFi protocol, you need to enable that with an extension. And so extensions kind of also enable functionality. So extensions are literally like everything else in DAO. And then the core can also own external contracts. So this is important if you want a DAO to be like the owner of a protocol or product, and the smart contracts to kind of govern that protocol or product. And so just kind of getting specific to StackerDAOs. So we have you can choose among 3 products on StackerDAOs for kind of what best suits your use case. So like I mentioned before, we first have StackerDAO. That's based on Compound, and it's really like a permissionless primitive that uses an existing fungible token or NFT. Or really like, and I mean, it could be the DAO itself issues its own token. That kind of counts. That's what I mean by that as well. Or like the NFT project that mints its own NFT and then creates a DAO, but then the DAO will basically use that existing token contract as its governance for its governance tokens and for proposal submissions. And that's really best for like protocol DAOs, NFT communities. If you want to form a DAO, basically like an NFT project and kind of like use the NFT mint fees from that, metaverse ecosystems and more. And then we have clubs. Clubs are membership gated via NFTs, primitives to raise funds, govern, and take action. So basically, clubs are much more gated, and really, it's only people who deposit funds have voting power. So they'll get like a governance token, fundable token in return for their voting power. And the idea is that this is a lot more constrictive. This is for situations in DAOs where you don't want this necessarily permissionless structure, and you kind of want the DAO to then like, so the DAO later can always, so basically to basically fund the DAO, you need to obtain what's called a membership pass. And this is allocated kind of when the clubs are formed, and the clubs can always issue more membership pass, and each pass in NFT can issue more membership passes like throughout its life, and just vote and approve a proposal to do so. And again, this is more for like situations where you want your members to be people who actually like provide some kind of funding. So that's why it's necessarily more gated, and it's best for like investment DAOs, right? So you want people who have the returns, or people who actually help to fund the DAO. Impact DAOs, service DAOs, which are kind of like more freelancer agencies. If freelancers want to kind of put some money together to then coordinate marketing or coordinate like different customers, get benefits together, guilds, and more. And like I mentioned before, we have teams, which is a multi-sig primitive for working groups to manage resources and smart contracts. And this is more perfect for companies, nonprofits, NFT projects, working groups, sub-DAOs, and early DAOs before decentralizing. And so on our platform, eventually, so it's still not open to the public, but eventually you'll be able to kind of to generate your DAO or your team, and you will likely the ability to form a legal entity with a few clicks of a button. We're also integrating this protocol called Magic to allow or to enable native Bitcoin funding. So you'll be able to fund a club with native Bitcoin on the front end. On the back end, what happens is the native Bitcoin swaps with wrapped Bitcoin and using this protocol called Magic, and the wrapped Bitcoin goes into the DAO's treasury. And then on our platform, you can manage governance, like submit proposals, vote on proposals, manage DAO's treasury, and there'll also be some sort of like some operational compliance as well. So you'll be able to form certain legal documents, and eventually, this is more down the line, but eventually receive some like tax assistance. That's kind of what I go into there. And that's all. Does anyone have any questions? I know that was a lot to go through, but here to field any questions you may have. Actually, I see the chat. Sorry, I just noticed the chat here. If I said 2001, yeah, that was 2021. What sort of measures are that? Yeah, so DOS attack. So that is, I mean, that's like frankly probably the biggest exploit. That's frankly the biggest way you deal with that is having that time lock and some sort of emergency powers, which kind of sucks in the sense that like there is a trade-off in that obviously having emergency powers kind of make the DAO a little less or more centralized, or because then you have this group of people that can essentially kind of potentially take over the DAO. But if you do have this like fully autonomous DAO, and you have people who are kind of taking advantage of voter fatigue and submit like 100 proposals in, and no one notices that like the 101st proposal is a very malicious proposal, and they're able to get it through. That's kind of the world that the can of worms that you're opening. There are other ways to limit this, but if you limit the other ways, kind of open up some other trade-offs. It's all trade-offs. The other things you can do is to set a high proposal submission threshold. And so if you have a high proposal submission threshold, you probably limit certain people, but it doesn't solve the complete problem because maybe your attacker has a large amount of tokens, maybe like 10%, right? And you also then limit the amount of proposal submissions that can then be submitted, because how many people have a 10% or 5% of tokens, right? The other thing you can do is lock up tokens when you submit a proposal. And then have a threshold for that. And so this basically limits the amount of people who the amount of time that someone can submit a proposal. The trade-off there, though, is that it may limit governance a lot, and you actually see this because people don't really want to lock up their tokens. Especially because if you have like a 7-day voting period to lock up your tokens for 7 days, people don't like that. Especially if like it's a DeFi project that has some sort of staking, right? Because now you have a major opportunity cost so now you have a major opportunity cost to submit a proposal, because you basically are losing out on all the yields that you would normally be getting. And so that's kind of the trade-off there. So it's basically trade-offs all the way down, and it really depends on your structure and kind of not your structure, but your use case and what's ideal for your use case. Or what's the ideal structure for your use case given your use case. So I hope that answered the question, Mark. I know like it's not a straight answer, but it's basically it depends. And you should kind of jump a link to Discord. Yeah, I can do that.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Is Stacker's DAO Labs a DAO itself?
Yeah, so currently we're not for a few reasons, and we always get that question. The number one question, so there's like there's two primary reasons. One, I think for it to work properly, especially at this stage, we would need to issue tokens to incentivize people. And this leads to a second problem. I think two, because like what we're building is essentially SaaS. It's basically a SaaS product, right? And I think given SaaS, and you see this with other crypto projects, like literally any SaaS type project is necessarily very centralized, and they're actually not DAOs. And actually, most DAO infrastructure projects paradoxically are not DAOs themselves. I think for the exact same reasons why we're not a DAO. So you necessarily have to be kind of more centralized. And so what this means is that if we issue a token, and as a lawyer, right, like there's no way, in my opinion, that token wouldn't be security, due to the nature of kind of the central nature that like we have to kind of be. And I think if we're not as centralized, at least in the beginning, frankly, we would fail miserably, because I don't think for like these type of SaaS products that you can necessarily kind of be at the centralized, at least in the beginning. That may change in the future, depending on the regulatory regime, and once we're larger, right? Like once we're larger and we kind of have more things, it can be like more decentralized. And that's also, I'm generally like very pro progressive decentralization for certain use cases. You know, I think, for example, the DeFi product, right, or DeFi protocol, like once the protocol is up, it's kind of up, right? Like that's it. It's like one protocol and it's up. And so the DeFi protocol can't necessarily be a lot more decentralized. I think for other products, it makes sense to kind of be more centralized in the beginning, and then potentially like decentralize and become a DAO later on, once a lot of the infrastructure is already built, and then you just kind of give it all away. And so that's kind of the approach, you know, we think we would potentially take. I would say, I think it would probably be a lot easier. A lot of things I think would be easier how do we just like become a DAO and issue tokens. We think we could potentially have more people working with us. B, I think, frankly, raising money would have been a lot easier. There are a lot of funds that like really just want your fucking token. And I've spoken to a lot of funds that like are like, oh, like this product sounds great. And then as soon as I say there's no token, they literally just stop. Like they're like, oh, no token, that's it, done. Like no more interest. They just want the token, which I mean isn't necessarily a good thing, because clearly they just want the token because it's more liquid than equity, and they just want to like be able to dump the token later. But you know, it's like a trade-off. And I think as a lawyer, because I know the legal issues involved, I was talking to another founder about this. Basically, he was like, yeah, even though there's a lot of legal risk, I can still sleep at night. Because I think I know too much as a lawyer. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, I think, if we like issued our token. And I think we would need a token to properly incentivize people for something like this.
Cool.
Hold on. I'm trying to get the link. Hold on a sec. Does anyone have any other questions in the meantime?
I have a follow-up question.
Shoot, go ahead.
So since all the smart contracts that are modular is going to be open source, right? So what's the model for StackerDAO Labs to either is subscription or is there
Yeah. So this is also the other like the $1 million question with DAO tooling, because most DAO tooling startups, which we're not in position in, have raised stupid amounts of money of VC dollars, and so are basically right now like launching everything for free, but then they have to monetize it at some point. And so it's like there's like the monetization model actually hasn't really emerged yet in the industry. We're actually doing a subscription. We're gonna do a subscription. And it's funny because I didn't even like think of a subscription because it's like Web3, right? Like no one wants to do a subscription. And actually after talking to a lot of people and bouncing different revenue like ideas off of them, like on what you would prefer, how you would prefer to be charged, a lot of people actually prefer subscriptions. I think the idea is that DAO founders are very similar to startup founders in some ways. And actually a lot of DAO founders are like current or former startup founders. And I think for them, they actually like kind of the, because I find this myself as a startup founder, they like the predictability of just having like some kind of like monthly payment, like some kind of monthly payment subscription. And so I think what we're going to do is basically do that, plus have the ability to then like also have the DAO itself to pay. And like you mentioned, yeah, because the smart contracts are free, or not free, but like they're open source. And so like you'll be able to generate the DAO, but then if you want to like use our app for management, et cetera, then that's like what the subscription will be for. And the idea being that we'll have these like legal tech tools, the tax assistance, et cetera, as kind of like the value add. Plus the UI itself is actually like not as easy as you think it would be. As like the value add for the subscription.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny because like again, I was like in no world would people want to pay like a SaaS subscription in the beginning, and it's kind of funny that like it ended up being the thing that people would prefer. Although for our private beta, we're charging kind of like a one-time fee, and then you never have to pay again. And then you kind of just like whatever we do afterwards, you just are going to get as like an early user. But it's kind of funny because people. Again, my first instinct was that people would want to do a subscription, and it turned out that those like I think that like sometimes people try too hard to move away from Web 2 models, but like sometimes there's a reason why certain Web 2 things made sense. And so just something to keep in mind generally as you do your product like you don't have to. It's like the DAO thing I was mentioning before, right? Like if it doesn't make sense for you to form a DAO, don't form a DAO, right? And that's like, and I think people sometimes like push too hard on Web 3 things. Because they feel like they have to because it's Web3, and sometimes more traditional like organizations or business models actually just make a lot more sense. Hold on, I'm like clearly incompetent with Discord right now for some reason. I can't, because I usually like manage Discord 100% on my phone, and for some reason on the app I can't find on my computer, I like can't find the link, but I'm copying and pasting it right now from another place. So here's the link to the Discord. Does anyone else have any questions?
Have you developed some smart contracts on your own?
So I have like messed around with certain smart contracts, but I myself, like I would never hold myself out as a dev. You don't want me writing in your code. I could definitely read a good amount, but again, like you just don't want me actually like engineering stuff. Like it's such a complicated thing for it's complicated contract for an app. So I personally, I would say I don't. But again, that's why I definitely rely on my great co-founder for that.
Mm-hmm. So I mean your team actually, not you personally. So.
Oh yeah. We've developed, I think at this point, frankly, a lot of smart contracts. I think we've developed something like 70 something. Because the thing is like because all these DAOs are like they're operating systems, right? So each time we do a new template, it's like 8 or 9 different contracts plus each extension. All right, so any added functionality is a new contract. And there's also like certain traits and stuff, like those are new contracts. And so, yeah, we developed a lot. If you go on StackerDAOs.com, I'll put the link here, you can actually go to our GitHub. It's like right on there on the top right, and you can look at all our contracts. There are a good amount that are currently not public just because we're still testing them and working on them. And so we will like push, like once, we're kind of satisfied with them, we'll push them up. So there's probably like a good amount of that still isn't pushed up yet, but there's still, I think, something like 50 or so that you could probably find there.
And you have them audited?
On our GitHub. Sorry?
You have them audited or?
So not yet, they're still pending audit.
Okay.
But they've been peer reviewed by like some pretty good devs in the ecosystem. Like literally people who've like helped to invent Clarity have like reviewed our contracts. But they haven't been like formally audited by an auditing firm, like PointsBet, like one of the big auditing firms. But they've been like peer reviewed by people in the ecosystem, though not all of them, I would say, because we have like 50, like I mentioned. But like I would say like what we would consider kind of the more important ones have been like kind of like thoroughly tested and peer reviewed by the top devs in the ecosystem.
Okay, so what do you recommend? I mean, do you recommend that people always have their contract audited before they go live, or the peer reviews are enough?
Yeah, so that's tough, and I would say I can't really give you a great answer there, because so it depends on what you're doing. So I think for a DeFi protocol, yeah, you probably are going to have to, because again, that's like one instance, it's like one protocol, right? And it's like, that's it, it's like live, and that's that. For us, every DAO we launch is its own protocol, right? So we're just like, if we launch 100 DAOs, 100 different protocols, and some of the different structures, etc., and they're easily upgradable. Like DeFi protocols, they can be upgradable, but it's like a lot trickier because you have a lot of liquidity at stake, and people may need to kind of like move liquidity, things like that. Like for us, it's like our contracts are like very modular. It's like you can just upgrade them if need be, number one. And number two, like the worst case scenario, the DAO just votes to like send its treasury somewhere else, so to a new contract, which is a lot easier than having like tens of thousands of people withdrawing liquidity from a liquidity pool and then having to move it. And so it really depends on your project, I would say. Like for example, I don't think a lot of the NFT contracts, frankly, are not audited. And I think the reason being, right, for like each NFT is like its own instance, even if they're using the same contract, but they've been like peer reviewed by like top devs in the ecosystem, which is why everyone just like uses them, they trust them, etc. But they're not audited, right? But then if you have this like project, especially if you have your own token, if you're gonna have your own token, to get that token listed on a SEX, like a centralized exchange, you need to have it audited from like third-party audit for like these like very top, very like well like high reputation firms, or else the centralized exchange will not take your token. So that's the other thing, and that's another reason why a lot of DeFi protocols tend to get audited. And that's the other thing. The other thing, frankly, for us, it's we're kind of waiting until we've shored up all the contracts, because frankly, we're still in our early stage startup. We haven't had like a crazy amount of funds raised yet, and audits are extremely expensive. And so we just like don't have like the money to sort of like get an audit and then come back because we have some upgrades, then get another audit, and then like come back with a new contract and get another audit. So we're kind of waiting to kind of pile them all together on one go, and then we're sending them all to the audit firm. So those are all kind of considerations that you need to kind of have in mind. It really depends on what you do, I guess, like what your financial position is, and then this particular circumstances of that use case and what you're building, and then also if you want to get your token kind of listed. I would say eventually, though, you do want to get, if you have a big project, there's a lot of users using your smart contracts, I would say eventually you do want to like get a formal audit. And okay,
yeah, I have a legal question, much more legal actually. So as I understand, till certain point, we don't need to be, DAO is not to be like incorporated in any jurisdiction. Like imagine that we have a bootcamp here, Clarity Bootcamp. We establish our DAO. Everyone's put some money inside it as a pot, and then we just like buying stupid NFTs, deploying to contracts to the mainland.
Yeah. So basically, form a club. That's exactly what our club product does. Yeah.
I don't need to incorporate it, and I don't go to any jurisdiction saying like, oh well, I need a legal entity for this. But what's point really we want to have like a legal entity is the first question. The second one is, if you're in startup world, everyone knows that Delaware is the best, state to establish startup. Is there any specific jurisdiction or state or country, or, if you're in gambling, the Cayman Islands, you establish all your servers over there and post bucks and everything. Is there any like a place for DAOs to be like really safe and so you suggest to establish as like a legal entity?
Yeah, to your first question. So again, this is legal advice. It's all general, like for your own particular facts and circumstances. Get your own attorney, et cetera. But for your first question, it really depends. And I know that's like the worst answer ever, but it really does. In that, it depends what the DAO is doing. It really depends on what the DAO is doing. So. In the situation you outlined before, where you have like basically some kind of investment DAO, right, where people put in funds in, they go then like buy some NFTs. The reason why you may want to form a legal entity, and I would recommend for investment DAOs forming an LLC, because actually it's pretty easy. Like if you gate membership, you can actually have in your LLC operating agreement that like transfers of like membership units in the LLC transfer with like the governance tokens or membership tokens in the investment DAO. And so, but the reason why you would want to have an LLC is a few reasons. So one, taxes. So if you have profits, you guys are going to owe taxes, and what's going to happen is that it's going to feed through to like, so every individual is going to be responsible for that DAO's full taxes, right? So even though you only receive 10% of the profits, you are liable for 100% of the taxes if you don't form a legal entity. If you form a legal entity, then the legal entity is responsible. And it's a lot easier to kind of do it that way and have the taxes being paid by the legal entity instead of having it go pass through. So if you have like 4 or 5 friends, that's not a problem. If you have like 30 and like one person doesn't pay their share of taxes, everyone else will owe that share. And that's when the problems arise. Like you said, it's at what point, I'm not sure, but if you really trust your friends, right? Like, it's if you're with like 3 or 4 people that like they're your friends from like years, yeah, you probably don't have to form an illegal entity, and you just like, yeah, I trust this person that they'll pay their taxes and won't fuck me, you know. But again, if you have a lot more people and you don't know them, then that's when it might be easier just have it be the taxes be done by the entity level. The second reason why you may want to form an entity is if you want to take any off-chain action. So let's say, okay, you guys form this DAO, but then you also maybe someone comes in and has an opportunity to invest in like some kind of real estate, right? Well, now you need to take off-chain activity. Any off-chain activity is going to require a legal entity to A, enter into a contract, and B, to form a bank account. Because like no bank will give you a bank account by just saying, oh, you need to form a legal entity. And so those are kind of the 3 reasons why I would say like you want to form a legal entity generally. It's taxes, also limited liability. But if you don't have a product, right, you're probably less likely to like get hit with a lawsuit. If you're just investing, you're probably less likely to be hit with a lawsuit. But like the 4 reasons you want an entity are like limited liability to your members. Second is taxes, which relates to limited liability actually. Because the idea is that you have an obligation, and the obligations will feed through to the actual individual members. And then entering into contracts and forming a bank account for off-chain activity. Those are kind of like I would say the 4 biggest reasons we want to form a legal entity. And then the second question is jurisdiction. So I would say if you're in the US, you want to go with Delaware, just because so there are certain DAO laws. Those DAO laws suck actually. They're like very opinionated on how you should form your DAO, and the DAO laws are like I think in Tennessee and Wyoming. You're better off just going to Delaware, which has a very liberal like freedom of contract approach, and you just put into your operating agreement that you're doing vote collection, treasury management via blockchain software. Done, right? Like cool. Now you have like your LLC in Delaware. Depending on what you're doing, if you're doing like a DeFi project, that's when things get very tricky. And that's when it's very fact dependent. That's when you're probably going to pay a lot in lawyer fees. And that's when you're probably going to do some kind of offshore arrangement where you have this like, Cayman Islands or the Panama Foundation, this like British Islands, like subsidiary company that like issues the token, and then this like Singapore or like US the software development company, and it's like really doing this regulatory arbitrage so that like if the SEC determines the tokens are securities, they like won't have jurisdiction over like the entity, the issuing entity, and so that's when things get complicated. And there's kind of a spectrum in between. It really depends on the use case. The easiest things for legal entities for DAOs are investment DAOs, impact DAOs. By impact DAO, I mean like something that like gives grants to like organizations or funds causes, because you just form like a nonprofit for that. It's like pretty simple, and you don't need like a board or anything for that. It's actually like really simple to form what's called a UNA, an unincorporated nonprofit association. You don't even need to register with the state. You just have this agreement that you like that like is like executed. Service DAOs, things like that. But then once you get to the protocol DAOs, that's when the legal entity becomes very, very difficult and very costly and very fact dependent, which is why it's so costly. Yeah, so Vinay, that's what I was talking about, the states that have like DAO laws that suck. So Wyoming, Frankly, it's like not great, but there is a committee. So the committee that runs like that legislation actually has proposed some amendments that actually would make it a lot better. But currently the problem is that the Wyoming DAO LLC law, it's like very opinionated, and you basically like need to like do it in a certain way, and you have to put your smart contracts in like a certain way, and like do your smart contracts a certain way, and like it like doesn't really make sense. It's like clearly like it's like the people like were trying to facilitate some things, but they clearly like still didn't speak to that many people in the industry, and so it actually constrains you in like what your DAO can do. Much more so than if you were just form a Delaware LLC and just like in the operating agreement, say you're using blockchain software for like vote collection and charge sheet management. DeFi DC to Reggie, lawsuit of Coinbase affecting the rest of the space. Was that the lawsuit that the guy, they were like insider trading basically, and then like Coinbase named a bunch of like token securities? Is that it? I just don't remember the name of the lawsuit. Track. Patent infringement. I actually might not be familiar with this case. If it's a patent infringement case, probably because patent infringement's like for most like lawyers in the space is like not that big of a deal. I think because it's like patent infringement, whatever. I would say it's probably pretty. So if you form a patent, I do know a little bit about patent litigation generally. So forming a patent, it would have to be like what's called like a method. Like you're patenting like a method, right? If this is, you can't patent code, but you can patent certain methods, like business methods. Those are really hard to enforce. They tend to get struck down pretty quickly and pretty easily. Not easily because patent litigation is very costly and long, but they tend to get struck down like very frequently once they actually go through the litigation. And so is this a situation where Coinbase was sued for infringing a patent? If Coinbase was the defendant here, I would probably say what's most likely going to happen is the patent's going to be struck down as invalidated, probably because it was like obvious or like wasn't like sufficiently unique, or like whatever Coinbase did was like sufficiently different enough that it wasn't captured by the patent. And that's just, again, me not knowing any of the facts, but just knowing what I know about like, patent litigation generally, and like just thinking how it applies would apply to crypto. Any other questions? You guys can also find me at, putting my handle here, on Twitter at Orlando_BTC. If you have like any other, want to follow me, have any questions, want to DM me, always happy to chat, whether it's DAO stuff, crypto law stuff. Generally, if you think about a project or anything, please feel free to reach out. Happy to help out anyway.
Yeah, can I take this last few moments to share?
Yeah, and I'm actually free for the next 15 minutes. So if there are further questions, like we don't have to leave now. Just I didn't seem like anyone had any other questions. But yeah, Benaya, go ahead.
All right. So actually, a few days ago, Orlando, remember I was asking you how I wanted to share one of the examples for a project. So this is it. So here I go. And especially we talked, for more than an hour about DAOs and all the stuff about it. So here I'd like to share this example for a service DAO, and would like to get feedback from everybody. So,
sure.
So the problem statement is the law education. It's expensive. So I think DAOs can be.
Sorry. What's expensive?
Like the law school, like
Yeah.
So it's expensive, so not everybody has access or capabilities to go and become a lawyer.
Yes.
So, and I think DAOs can be really effective in tackling specific focused problem statements like that. And so what the proposal is, because 4 states in the United States, like one is California, another is New York, and I think Louisiana and one other, they have a the provision such that interested people can study law for like 4 years under guidance of a licensed lawyer in those particular states. And then
Yep.
you could prepare yourself to take the state certification bar examination.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah,
pass, then you become leverage that to bring in people from both sides of that marketplace, the law teachers, mentors that can come in and they'll get their work to the interested people who can claim and do these paralegal works and then build their resume for 4 years and build that curriculum that produces lawyers over the course of multiple years. So
my
yeah.
first reaction to that is, so the legal industry is the most prestige. So I have worked in finance. My first job out of college was as a like a bond trader on Wall Street. So I've now worked in and also I've worked for a startup before law school. I have worked on Wall Street in finance. I've worked for startups, tech, Web3 now, and have also been a lawyer, worked at law firms. The legal industry is the most, by far, irrationally prestige obsessed industry I've ever seen, and it's not close. And like Wall Street's pretty prestige obsessed. This blows it. Like lawyers, like the legal industry blows it out of the water. And so the problem, I think, and what most lawyers will have probably, I think, will have the same reaction, is that the apprenticeship approach is kind of viewed as a major red flag, and because you don't have like the stamp of like a good law school, and it's actually and not just a good law school, but like people view it. It's viewed very negatively in the profession. It's viewed as like, and I think it's stupid. I think that's stupid, right? Like, who cares? But it is just like viewed very negative. The perception is that's a very negative perception in the profession. That basically you either couldn't get into law school, or couldn't get into like a good enough law school that you were just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna like do this apprenticeship thing. And then C, which I think is totally wrong actually, but I think a lot of people also think that somehow you need to go to law school and have like for 3 straight years, have like bullshit law things that you honestly never even use in practice drilled into you, to be like a good lawyer, which is like total nonsense, because what most lawyers do have like has no application to what they did or learned in law school, but they still have that perception. And the legal industry is very annoying, and that's why it's like very hard to disrupt. There's like a few major reasons why the legal industry is hard to disrupt, but that's one of them. Is like this cultural element to it. And so the concern that I would have is no one would hire these people, these lawyers. So like Kim Kardashian is doing this, right? But Kim Kardashian is Kim Kardashian. This is why you don't see or hear of many people who have done this, who've received their like they'll become a lawyer through this avenue, because they can't get jobs because people won't hire them. And so you would almost need to solve that problem first. And it's not just and I'm telling you right now, the apprenticeship thing, that won't work either, because they won't be able to hire them, because usually the people that do the apprenticeship things like don't have the money to really take on someone full time. So the apprenticeship thing is almost like free labor. So that's why they're incentivized to do, like the law firms that do it are incentivized to do it because it's free labor for them, basically. And so they then don't usually don't, and they're usually small firms or whatever that don't have that much money. So they usually don't have the money to then be able to kind of turn around and hire those like really newly minted lawyers. And so you're going to run into this situation where you might have these people who go on this, like, I think like, I forgot how long to be an apprentice for. I mean, it's like 2 years, I forgot, or like, then go through this journey where they do this for 2 years, take the bar, etc., take really their life, and then not be able to get a job. And then that's going to be a problem. And so that's my first reaction, like the biggest concern of what you're saying. And the thing is, I wish this wasn't the case, because I think it's a great idea, but I think the realities of the legal culture and the legal profession would make it very difficult to kind of do successfully, which doesn't mean necessarily that it would fail. Who knows? I'm like very pro experimental, but I think the chance of something like that succeeding would be very low, just because of like the bullshit nature of like the legal industry's culture.
How about you focus that a little bit more? Say right now the crypto industry is up and coming. It's, if you really look back, it's 13, 14 years, right? So there needs to be expertise developed in where crypto meets the law. So there's a big gap where that needs to be filled. So these DAOs can be specific in, you know, attracting people that are crypto-friendly lawyers that want to build their expertise in crypto, and then you get these ins, so to speak, and get them to learn
Yeah.
the law. So when you meet these two, you know, you can form like powerful alliances that
Right.
transform. And I also want to make another comment you said about the prestige in the industry. Isn't that just like saying, okay, you know, all the guard is really like protecting inside the gate? Because
Oh, dude, I know, I agree. I'm saying, like, if you want to try it. But I would just say, like, so again, I'm very pro, like, let's like make some changes and change things up. I just think like I myself, again, having even gone through like Wall Street, which is so prestige obsessed, have been so utterly just like shocked. And like I'm always so floored at how prestige obsessed lawyers are and how backwards they are in their thinking and how much they refuse to like change and evolve. And the problem is that like it's like you kind of have to move a lot of people in the industry, and they're also so risk averse too. That's the other problem. They're like very risk averse. But I hear you on the Web3 thing. I think, you know, that I don't know, like who knows, maybe it could potentially work. But the problem too that you're gonna have is that, like, you know, if I'm issuing a token, right? And this is all going to depend on how much money I have. But if I'm issuing a token and my livelihood may be on the line if this token ends up being a security, and I want to hire someone who goes through this program or this apprenticeship who has like no actual and just passed the bar, who has no real experience yet, like they're gonna need to kind of like get some practicing experience, more beyond the like apprenticeship thing. And that's kind of where I see the disconnect, is that how do they get from like passing the bar to then kind of building up the like preliminary, like at least initial legal skills that then they can then apply their Web3 knowledge to clients. The other problem too is that, again, like I was saying, because like legal is very important, and like maybe the SEC or even like criminal charges against you, right? People don't want to hear that, like, oh, you just came out of law school, right? Like no one wants to hear that shit. They want to hear, I've done this like 200 times, right? Like I have so many clients that I'm doing this for so many clients, etc. Because like literally your life is on the line. So there's also the demand for that as well. May not be exactly what you think. If you haven't yet been in that position where you're hiring legal counsel, and you know, like, and you're evaluating your potential legal counsel depending on what kind of risk you're taking. Again, I'm not against it. I'm just saying, like, you know, it could be huge, could be like have major potential, but there is like this major juggernaut force, like this like massive juggernaut force that I think, you know, I would just like caution about, and just like mention that they like it's like you could like lawyers don't have a disruptors, like innovators mindset. They just don't. They're very, especially people who've gone straight through law school and never worked before outside of law in their life. They very much are so risk averse. They just like do not think in that way. And so like what may be so rational and reasonable to you, to a lot of lawyers, like won't. And so that's just like, again, I'm not trying to necessarily impede the idea. I'm just saying, like, heads up, you're walking into like a juggernaut of like this like massive wall that you have to kind of like blow through, which, you know, may be part of the opportunity, right? So
actually, I just have a few comments to add on this one. So that's actually, I have you know, consulted with a lawyer to hire, and the experience was like, you know, it's very expensive and all that. So I was quite surprised by the cost. And I think lawyers that would come from the DAO's pipeline would be, you know, more accessible in terms of the cost.
totally.
Well. That can be like, you know, attractive proposal for the firms that are looking, you know, consulting in, you know, Web3 or crypto or whatnot. And then also the real promise of Web3 is disruption, like these older industries that haven't changed for so long, right? So I think that could all be like a perfect combo to
Yeah. So I mean, the legal industry, right? In some ways, DAOs kind of are in some ways disrupting parts of the legal industry, and smart contracts generally are disrupting part of the legal industry. But the legal industry, like, I'm a lawyer myself, and I decided not to disrupt that industry. Because I think it's, from what I know, I think it's that hard, and that like from what I know about lawyers, I think it's just like your chance of success are so. And actually, legal tech is actually one of like the worst performing like VC funded sectors in tech. For that, and I'm telling you for that reason, because everyone thinks, oh, we can do this way more efficiently. It makes so much sense. They don't do it. They just like don't do it. But I agree with, again, it leaves you with more opportunity. And again, maybe because I have like this insider's perspective, I'm like too pessimistic about it, right? So like maybe doing like an outsider to come in. But you know, I'm always like pro like encouraging of like experiments and trying. But just again, just wanted to let you know that like you are up against a very formidable like opponents in this like culture.
Thank you, Orlando. I appreciate the response.
Does anyone have any questions?
Question. Are you familiar with Reggie Nielsen?
Is this the guy who like has like submitted like a billion like crypto patents and then tries to like enforce them all against people? Is that the guy?
No, he actually has only one patent filed, and he got granted a patent in Japan. I believe it was a year or two ago, and he got the patent granted in the US last year. And supposedly, because this is like one of the most important patents in crypto.
Is it's the guy who alleges he invented DeFi or something? Or
Yeah,
like patented DeFi?
essentially, yeah, because pretty much.
Yeah. So if
Sorry,
I would tell you right now. So exactly what's gonna happen. So I do know this case. Okay. So what's gonna happen most likely is if Coinbase decides to litigate this through, the patent will become invalidated. Most likely, there's just no way. Being granted a patent doesn't mean shit. I would say like most patents that end up being litigated against, like or try to be enforced, that actually go through a lawsuit. At least like for the vast majority of patents, at least like a significant majority of the patent ends up becoming invalidated. And so it's actually and Coinbase, and it's all about lawyering, having good lawyers, and Coinbase they're gonna have better lawyers than what he has, than what he has, and patent litigation really comes down to facts, and so you can't dismiss a lot of patent cases right away, and they're incredibly expensive because you're dealing with like a shit ton of documents and a shit ton of experts and all of these like scientists, and you have to deal with like the economic side of things and what are the damages. So you deal with a lot of like, you pay a lot of like kind of like patricians, a lot of economists. It's like incredibly expensive. And so what may happen is Coinbase might just settle it because they're like, actually, we think we'll win this and strike down the patent. But to get to that point, it's going to cost us like literally like tens of millions of dollars, like 10, 20 millions of dollars over 5 years. Instead, we could probably settle this for like $1 million and call it a day, right? And so they might do that. So if you see a settlement, I would say don't think that like he has a valid patent or something over DeFi. It just means that they did the math and they were just like, you know what, it's cheaper for us to just like settle this and not go through and win, because if you go through and win again, it's going to cost like $20 million minimum.
Gotcha. Yeah, and from my understanding, he's not after trying to litigate against people, but he was granted the patent, so he's just kind of trying to license it. Essentially, that's what he was saying. But
yeah, like these kind of business method patents are very hard to enforce. Like, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Like, right? Because like patents are supposed to kind of really like they're supposed to be kind of for more like tangible ideas, and the business methods like almost kind of patent like an arrangement, and it's like, dude, you're like kind of like patent is like more like nebulous arrangements and ideas, and usually it can be found somewhere else, right? Like that particular arrangement, like all you need is like someone on the internet talking about it before you patented it, before you like register the patent, and that's it. Like that's it. It was like it's what's called like an obvious invention, and it wasn't like novel. Those are like actual elements like obviousness and novelness. and that's the patent will get invalidated. Or Coinbase can be like, well, our method is slightly different actually, and so fuck off. We didn't infringe on your patent. And so there's like so many ways to win these lawsuits. It's just a problem that they're so fact dependent that they end up being incredibly expensive, and just like people just, it's like worth it for a lot of, especially big companies, to settle, which is exactly why he's only going after large companies, because he's probably spoke to a plaintiff's patent lawyer that told him that, and has told them like, yeah, there's no point in like trying to finish against individuals. Go after the biggest pockets because they'll give you money to settle. Like that's literally like the strategy of these like patent like litigation firms.
Gotcha. Okay. And one thing I heard him mention was that like Bank of America is one of the biggest patent holders, because I didn't know financial institutions file a lot of patents for some of their processes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I think it's also just to like anything with patents is very extractive, right? It's just like, I'm gonna like try patent this, and it's also like a game, right? Because patent litigation is so expensive. It's like, okay, I actually don't think this will infringe on your patent, or I don't think your patent's valid because your patent's bullshit. But I also don't want to like get into a lawsuit with you because you have deep pockets. So I'm just gonna license your product from you, right? So it's like very like extractive, and like by definition, a patent's a monopoly, right? So it's like very monopolistic on an idea, but that also makes it hard to enforce, because it's like, you know, how do you define the boundaries of this patent, right? Like, and it's like, and that's what it all, like the whole litigation, the whole case becomes about, like defining the boundaries of the patent, like where, like what exactly is the patent like in practice, and then it's like, did this actually infringe the patent, and also was a patent like properly granted, was it novel, was it obvious, or was it not obvious, I should say. Like all of these things basically go into it, and so there's like a lot of ways to kind of just blow up that lawsuit. It just costs a lot of money, and no one wants to deal with it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If that's all, I'll see everyone later. Thanks for having me. And yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions.
Thank you, Orlando. This was a really great discussion. Appreciate you being here and presenting for us.
Take care.